So you said this in one of your blogs. You said, as an American, I sometimes found it hard to appreciate all that other countries have to offer or to even be aware of it.
Yeah. America tends to have this kind of like somewhat toxic exceptionalism. And they're like, we're the best. Everything comes from us. Like soft power, hard power, everything comes from us. They don't understand any other culture. They don't really care to understand because they don't feel like they need to.
Yeah. Is Stanford known for like a lot of entrepreneurship? You hear them dropping out to like then go build this startup, right?
That's what Stanford's known for. All the professors are just like constantly drilling into you. They're just like, look, take the jump, like you're not gonna regret it. Blah, blah, blah. You know, they're always pushing entrepreneurship. I mean, even like their motto is change lives, change organizations, change the world. It's like, it's all about like, you deserve and you should be changing everything you can. It's, you know, it's like that.
Yes.
If everyone is successful all the time, you would never learn, right? If you play tennis and you win every single match, you're probably not playing the right people, realistically speaking. Like you need failures to continue to grow. And why would you deprive yourself of the opportunity to fail? You know, because that is the opportunity to grow.
Jesse, you made a big move from LA to Jakarta, not just for love, but mostly for love. I mean, LA to Jakarta is the other side of the world. You couldn't get any further. What surprised you the most coming to Southeast Asia?
That's a big question. I think, for me, you know, I think people always talked about how friendly the people are. I think I was quite surprised by that because I think there was a part of me that was a little bit skeptical maybe, like, why would people be very friendly to a foreigner? But I really I felt very welcomed. So I would say that part was like a positive surprise.
Yeah.
I think that there are certain, there's one negative surprise maybe was when you see the pictures of Jakarta, because I've never been to Indonesia or Jakarta before I moved. And when you see pictures of it, it's like this bustling metropolis. It's beautiful. There's all these buildings, you know. And then I think one thing that I realized was there's very clear parts of town or maybe parts of different cities in Southeast Asia that are very nice, very developed, like the most modern you can get. And then there are some parts that are the least modern that I'd seen. And so kind of like the fact that that can coexist, I think, in one city was quite surprising to me. It's just not something that I was ever used to, you know? And so it was cool to see. But at the same time, it was a bit of a adjustment that was required, I guess.
Yeah. But were there any sort of like hesitations with, because you got to pack up your whole life, I mean, work-wise, career-wise, and in a way restart?
Yeah, sure.
So did you have to like take some time to think about that?
Definitely. I definitely thought about it, but I never went back and forth, you know? I was never like torn in my mind, oh, should I do this, should I not? It was like, I felt like it was very obvious from the beginning. And I think it really helped because I just graduated from business school. And that's kind of like already a very natural like resetting period. You know? So it was hard to wrap my head around, but I never really ever doubted that it was going to be the right move.
Yeah. And so can I call you a writer, or do you just sort of dabble in writing at times?
I would love to be identified as a writer.
But you do write, you have a blog on Medium, and I think, you know, a little bit on business and entrepreneurship, and then you'll move to Jakarta. So you've been sharing a lot about that journey. What is writing for you? Is it a way of processing what you're going through, a way of releasing it? Yeah. Is it kind of therapeutic in that way?
Yeah, exactly. It's like that. And I have in my notes app, I have a lot of writing that doesn't get published.
That doesn't make it to the...
Doesn't make it, right? But for me, writing is really a way to collect my thoughts. I think, you know, I used to journal. I don't journal anymore, but I guess I do more writing like that. And I wrote, one of the more recent ones I wrote was like this letter to myself. I wrote a letter to myself, and that I felt like was purely therapeutic and purely, you know, a journal. And that's just me not trying to think about anyone who's reading it other than myself. And just writing from me. And so,
did you share that? Did you put it up? Oh, you put it up.
Yeah, okay. I did. And so, it's been really nice. I would love to write more. I actually find writing to be maybe my favorite medium, as opposed to like, you know, videos or whatever. I just like the beauty of writing, the simplicity of it.
Yeah. But what's so, I guess, magical about it? Because when you speak to so many, therapists, but also just as a form of processing, a lot of people say it actually it's got a lot, it impacts the person, right? Would you...
You mean the person who's writing?
Yeah, exactly. Would you recommend that then for individuals to take a, because I like writing, but I struggle a little bit with it.
Yeah.
So, but I recognize the power that it has.
Yeah, I think like any kind of creation has its people are gifted in this type or that type.
Yeah.
And for me, for some reason, I've gravitated towards writing, but it's funny because when I was a kid, when I was a student, I really disliked writing.
Do you have to be a reader to be a writer?
Probably helps. Probably helps.
Okay.
And I do read a good amount.
Okay.
And so I think, it just kind of works that way. But I think not everyone needs to be writing. I mean,
you find what works for you.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
So you said this in one of your blogs. You said, as an American, I sometimes found it hard to appreciate all that other countries have to offer or to even be aware of it.
Yeah.
So as a non-American, sometimes we do look, and I'm generalizing here, we do look to the US and we're like, can they be very inward looking? Or depending on where you live in the States or what you do, you don't really know what's going on in the rest of the world. Is that what you felt, that you experienced?
Absolutely.
Even going to like B school and having probably very international friends.
For sure. Because I think America tends to have this kind of like somewhat toxic exceptionalism. And
we're the best.
Yeah. And they're like, we're the best. Everything comes from us, like soft power, hard power, everything comes from us. Yeah. And it's just not true.
Yeah.
But that is how Americans think. And, coastal Americans who have maybe a slightly more global point of view, like I would have said I was, even them are, I think, just not traveled. They don't understand any other culture. They don't really care to understand because they don't feel like
I don't need to. Yeah.
And so it does definitely get in the way. And again, for me, I identified as someone who's like, I'm Korean American, I'm an immigrant, and like blah, 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 diverse backgrounds. And still, when push comes to shove, I really found myself dinging on like, but America is the best. Why would I need to know anything else? Why would I, it's
interesting.
It's kind of like that. And so when I came
When did that dawn on you? Was it when you were in school or?
It was when I was in business school. And primarily it was when I would have these conversations with my wife.
Yeah.
And she would kind of like highlight all these things. Like I would say a bunch of stuff and then she'd be like, I just want you to pause and like think about what you said, because it's like so, for example, very American centric, or you're assuming a lot of things about the rest of the world or what they want to aspire to or how people should live, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And she just kind of helped me really like recognize my narrow-mindedness in that moment.
Yeah, which is why I think having friends from different parts, different walks of life, different parts of the world, it has so much value.
Yeah.
It just gives you a perspective that,
Totally agreed.
But so you mentioned these two words, and in Malaysia, in Malaysian culture, we have the same as well, which is gotong royong and sopan santun, which you remember, right? Yeah. So maybe you can like explain a little bit about what they mean, but also why did those stand out to you? Because they are very, as a Malaysian, they are very, and I'm sure for Indonesia as well, very strong, I guess, cultural attributes that we hold on to.
Yeah.
But you also said that in the perspective of, which is in contrast to American individualism and directness.
Right.
So I guess, contrasting the two, but also, is one better than the other? You see the world is becoming more individualistic now.
Right. Yeah, I think individualism is so key in American culture. And here, the community is so key. And they are very different. I don't necessarily think one is better than the other, but I do think living in a community allows you to live maybe a more fulfilling, or it's easier to find support, and it's easier to, I think, maybe live a more comfortable life in that way.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think that there are real pros and cons. In terms of the directness versus like the politeness, right? I guess that's maybe the direct translation. But I personally, maybe this is a bit of a hot take, but I found the kind of roundabout and very polite leaning way of speaking in this culture as quite maybe difficult or not ideal, let's just say. And I think of politeness or being kind as sometimes you have to be very direct. And I've internalized that, hey, if I'm giving you, for example, feedback, or I'm telling you something doesn't work, or you shouldn't act that way, that's coming sometimes from a place of kindness.
Yeah.
Because I want the best for them. And here, if I were to act that way, they are seeing it as not always, but generalizing, sometimes it's seen as a form of aggression.
Yes.
And that to me feels like, oh, but you're then just prioritizing, this very shallow, this very shallow level of harmony instead of what's kind of on a deeper level, more harmonious, or what's better for each of us. And so I would say pros and cons. I think the community element I really respect, I really like, and that's a part of America that I didn't really get to see. But in terms of the indirectness, to be honest, I've continued to struggle with it, and
especially in the business world, right? Because you need to get the job done.
For sure.
And you need that common goal, that common mission that you have as an organization.
Definitely. Yeah. There's been a lot of meetings, I feel like, where time has been wasted because people are they're just talking in circles and not really getting to the point sometimes.
Yeah, so I run a nonprofit, an education nonprofit, and we had a workshop recently. We used the word radical candor.
Okay, that's nice.
And so there's like a whole thing on it, and that's it, right? Being able to what's considered passive aggressive, or what's you're being really nice, but you're not actually helping the person get better.
Right.
And then you've got this. How do you appreciate radical candor, which I think is why you're trying to.
Right.
But it's a slow burn. It's a slow process to get there.
It takes time to adjust, right? For sure. Yeah.
So I grew up in Malaysia, but to a Malaysian dad and an Irish mom, and I personally had this constant sense of belonging and then not belonging. But by far the pros outweigh the cons, right? So I feel like cultural awareness, being able to exist in different cultural settings, understanding them very organically from young. Also adaptability. I was very, I think I could live in any country, any society, and I'd probably be able to. So you're kind of like a cultural chameleon, if anything, right? Yeah. And I was listening to this interview the other day, and they were speaking about, this guy was talking about the ability to synchronize and harmonize.
Okay.
So he was saying synchronize is your ability to adapt, right, to the setting you're in. And then harmonize is to be fluid and to be able to flow with whatever you're trying to achieve, right? So I was like, oh, that's quite an interesting approach. And I kind of related it back to the sort of that mixed cultural upbringing. So I was just curious for you, you have your Korean American intersection growing up in the States.
Right.
How was that a struggle for you, or did you have to, or was it very natural to be Korean American? And then again, as an adult later on moving to Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and having to deal with that duality. Is that something you've navigated consciously, subconsciously?
Yeah. And a lot of that navigation, I think, happened also during business school and with the help of my wife. But yeah, I think growing up in the US, I spent my childhood in LA. And so I feel like in most of LA, it's very, very diverse, and there's a lot of Asians. There's a lot of Koreans.
Yeah.
And so actually it makes, for me, that growing up was quite easy. And then I spent a bunch of time on the East Coast in New York and in Boston where I had a harder time. I just feel like there were more stereotypes maybe of being a certain way. And it's weird because I felt like I was American through and through.
Like you see yourself as American.
Yeah, I see myself as American. And, I don't have an accent. I don't constantly see my own face, right? So I felt like, one of the Americans.
I belong here.
Yeah. And then sometimes, it is very clear when sometimes it's when you are being stereotyped for the way you look or whatever. And yeah, I mean, without getting into the specifics, there are definitely moments where, that's been very real for me in America. Coming here, I feel like, again, people are very, very welcoming in general. I think people are quite still welcoming of Americans and expats in general, Americans, and they are also very welcoming of Koreans. And, Korean culture here is prominent and well received. And so I feel like a lot of those things have worked in my favor. And I'm in a country where they like me and they accept me.
An advantage.
Yeah. And all the multi-facets of who I am are seen as positive things overall. And so that makes me just much more receptive and much more welcoming of this country myself. And so, it's been a pleasant transition on that front for sure.
So you graduated magna cum laude from Columbia.
Okay.
And
throwback,
with a degree. So your degree was in operations, research, and economics.
Yeah, right.
And then you went on, a few years later to do your MBA at Stanford. So not to and I feel like I'm stereotyping you. I'm Korean.
All good.
American, Asian, tiger mom, tiger parents.
Yeah.
But, I'm curious, was it your family? Was it an external or internal push or pressure? Was this something you wanted to do? like an academic route? I want to go to an Ivy League school, or was it also something from your family? And maybe tell us what does it take to graduate magna cum laude?
Well, generally, I would say stereotypes are generally true to some extent. So, I mean, it's definitely true that my parents were encouraging. I would not say that they were tiger parents, actually. And I was also the second child. I think they were actually much harder on my older sister. And so maybe they kind of adjusted their ways, but I felt like they treated me and my sister a little bit differently. They were a little bit looser with me. But they were definitely externally encouraging. So there was a lot of that external encouragement. And yeah, I mean, in hindsight, I definitely think what they did was really ideal. And at times I was quite frustrated. I remember one time I was studying for the SAT. So I had this big, thick SAT book, and I was really frustrated, and I like smashed my pen into the book, something like that. And I just had this very vivid memory about how frustrated I was studying. But at the same time, I mean, they were definitely right in encouraging me, forcing me to do all that.
But then once you leave your home, right, even if you're an undergrad, then life is very much yours. So even topping your class. So what is that actually? Magna cum laude. What does that mean?
That means that, I don't exactly remember the percent, but it means that you're in the top 10, or I want to say 10, but maybe it's 15% of the class, like that. And yeah, I think my parents had just drilled into me a certain work ethic and a certain competitiveness. I mean, actually, I'm extremely competitive. At the end of the day, I think that's what drives me. It's not like I want to be, I mean, there's a part of it that's like, I inherently want to be
the best,
at
whatever you do.
Yeah, but it's the best is always in relation to someone else, I think. That's how
like the best better than. Right.
Yeah, so that's.
And is that a trait that's stuck with you like through your life till today?
Yeah, fortunately or unfortunately, that has been fairly consistent.
Yeah. I mean, the competitive spirits are generally a good thing, unless it becomes sort of unhealthy, unless it maybe affects other aspects of life.
Right.
I would think.
Which I think sometimes you can't avoid.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I think in this capitalistic society, maybe it's positive. Yeah.
So jumping from like Columbia to Stanford, you did meet your wife there. So tell us a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah, I mean, we were in the same section. So what happens at Stanford is for the first half of the first year, you take every single class together with the same section.
Right.
And that section is 65, 70 people, something like that. And so my wife was in my section. So I had every single class. With my first day of school, I saw her, basically everyone goes around and like introduces themselves to the rest of the section. And when she introduced herself, she was explaining, the game was to explain your name. Right. Is there like some meaning or something interesting behind your name? And for her, she doesn't have a first and a last name like it is typical in, in other, whatever, in most of the world. And she basically has 3 names.
Okay.
And so with her, they used her last of the 3 as her last name.
Right, as her surname.
Right.
Yeah.
But that happens to be the name that she uses primarily.
Oh, okay.
So on her name card, it says Mauria Mauria. And so she went through this thing of explaining why is my name Mauria Mauria, which is just kind of odd. And I remember as she was explaining it, I just felt like she was so charismatic. Like that's like probably the only story that I remember. Right. The only explanation of a name. And so that was like a very, very strong first impression of just like her charisma and her speaking ability, I guess. And then just over time we got to meet, we interact a lot in the section. And then, luckily we liked spending time with each other. So I would say we kind of started as like friends, like thought partners first, and then relatively quickly evolved to, something more romantic.
What made you decide to want to go to B school? Because I feel like it's a natural next step, but for a lot of people, but did you really think about, is this what I want to do? Is this going to help my career?
At first, so I had a pretty like traditional background or career. I did consulting, which is relatively common for people to do after school. And then I did something, I worked at a startup in the middle. And then the big thing after that was I worked in private equity as an investor. And I feel like that's a relatively common path for if you're going to business school. And so I actually applied twice because I didn't get in and I really wanted to go to Stanford. And so when I didn't get into Stanford the first time, I applied again. But the first time I applied, I think it was kind of autopilot. I was like, this is the thing to do.
Okay.
With a traditional career, this is kind of the thing you do. And then when I didn't get in, and I had to grapple with, okay, do I want to apply only to Stanford again? And do I want to apply again, period, to business school? It gave me a lot more time to really think about it. And I think in that year, I realized I don't actually want to stay in my career. And I want to do something very different. And I want to be more entrepreneurial. I don't really want to have a boss. And so by the time that I went to school, what I was telling myself was, I'm very, very open. And the word that I used was like serendipity.
Right.
I'm very open to serendipity. Like if the world wants to throw something very different at me, this is the time.
Yeah.
Because I'm changing everything and I don't exactly know what I want to do.
And look at you, you turned up in Indonesia.
Yeah. So it turns out the universe really listens. It's like listens way more than I expected. But yeah.
Oh, that's quite, but that's quite interesting because you didn't get in the first time. Like a lot of people, they don't share that story of, I tried the first time, I didn't get in, but I was so, like my mind was so set on Stanford that I, like the following year, I'm guessing, and you got in then the following year.
Yeah.
Yeah. But is Stanford known for like a lot of entrepreneurship? So I read stories of like, you know, this billionaire founder who basically started their idea. It was born out of a Stanford dorm room or a classroom. And then you hear them dropping out to like then go build this startup, right? Is that a frequent story? Was that something you observed when you were there?
Yeah, for sure. And that's what Stanford's known for.
Right.
It's also what I observed. Like a lot of my classmates ended up pursuing entrepreneurship. And then I would say most importantly, like all the professors are just like constantly drilling into you. They're just like, look, take the jump. Like you're not going to regret it. Blah, blah, blah. You know, they're always pushing entrepreneurship, which is, maybe, I mean, if that's what you want to hear and you want to make that jump, but you're just a little timid, like it really helps that the professors are always speaking like that. So,
but that's interesting because we see the US as like the hub, the nucleus of entrepreneurship and startups and Stanford for that matter. What's the mindset? What is that mindset? Is it just fearlessness? Is it the kid who was tinkering on stuff at the age of 12 in his garage? Or just people around you that constantly champion this sort of like go crazy, go wild?
Yeah. I mean, you know, Palo Alto, where Stanford is like the center of Silicon Valley. And I feel like you're just surrounded by people who think this way. You're surrounded by people who tell you like the risk is worth it.
Yeah.
Even if you take the risk and it doesn't go well, like, don't worry, life will figure itself out. That's kind of just the ethos.
Yeah.
And I do genuinely believe that people at Stanford, again, I think that there's two sides, but it's not always a good thing, but they really believe that like, I am someone who is capable and should have the burden of trying to change the world. And they put this incredible weight on themselves, this incredible expectation on themselves, which again, I think that there's a lot of downsides.
So there is some ethical part of wanting to change the world, make it better?
Yeah. For the most part, there definitely is. Now, how long that sustains, I don't know. As in like people, I can just get hooked to entrepreneurship in general and they just like it for practical reasons also.
Yeah.
But definitely at the beginning, there's that, like, I mean, even like the Stanford's mantra, their like logo or their motto is change lives, change organizations, change the world. It's like, it's all about like, you deserve and you should be changing everything you can. It's, you know, it's like that.
Yes.
And so again, pros and cons, but it really is just hammered into you at that point. Yeah.
What were there like some concrete key learnings you took with you when you left Stanford?
I think for me, in terms of entrepreneurship, I really felt like I walked away with some amount of confidence because you see all your peers around you, you see everyone encouraging you to do it. And and you're hearing about all these stories and you realize, hey, like, you know, it's more possible than you thought. It's not just reserved for like this, you know, the super elite or whatever.
Yeah.
And so definitely I walked away with a little bit of confidence. And then two, I think the other main thing that I took away at business school, but specifically on entrepreneurship, is like a lot of small decisions matter, I feel like.
Like is it in life in general or?
Yeah, and also in business.
Okay.
Like how you choose to show up to your team or how you choose to handle this very small issue. Like let's say there's a conflict between two teammates and like how you show up, how you make little decisions. You know, these things really matter and they accumulate and they're often the difference between like a super high power team and like a less high power team. And so I felt like learning to be very thoughtful about those kind of like seemingly smaller things was something that I took away as well.
so obviously we know like a very small percentage of people have the privilege of going to, Ivy schools. And I'm curious, like what separates a good school from a great school?
That's a good question.
Because, a lot of times like go to university versus go to that university.
I see.
I'm just curious and you've gone to two good schools, great schools.
Yeah. And I've been lucky. I think, I only have a sample size of 2, so it's a little hard to say. But I think for undergrad, the best schools, or the reason, maybe I'll just say, the reason that I felt like Columbia was a great school for me is it really teaches you to have like independent thought.
Right.
And there's this concept of at Columbia, there's this concept of this core. You're like the first semester, everyone takes roughly the same classes. And even if you're an engineer or you're a philosopher or whatever, you're taking these like quite philosophical classes. Like the first book that you ever read, you're supposed to do before you start school. And then in day 1, you discuss this book, and that book is the Odyssey.
Oh, wow.
Right. Okay. So it's quite like it sets the tone, I think. And that's what the core is all about. It's like this very philosophical, no matter who you are, you need to have this basis of thought and questioning your world like that. And so I felt like that was quite interesting.
Powerful.
And very impactful.
Yeah.
And then with Stanford, there's a lot of pros and cons, but they're just constantly trying to inspire you, and they're trying to give you confidence, and they're bringing in people to talk, like guest speakers to talk to you. And it's not because you're supposed to learn about that specific business or whatever. It's like they're here to show you that anything is possible like that. And I feel like in that phase of life, a lot of the students really need that. That's what they need to kind of break out and do whatever they want to do and pursue the life they want. So
it's like life. You can design your life.
Yeah, totally.
Like the
which
courage
is a class,
to do it.
So it's a class called
Design Your Life,
which is very popular
at Stanford.
Yeah.
Okay. So I get something, especially coming back to my work, because I work with a lot of underprivileged children in education, and I think about not just in Southeast Asia, around the world, but the millions of children that forget going to like a great school, just going to university in itself is an achievement. And not even having the conversation of, do I need to be a millionaire, or do I have to be super rich? But even just getting out of poverty, just building a better life for themselves compared to what they have now. That in itself is already such a big win. Perhaps just being middle class, So things that I think about that are super important for young people, and to use the word self-mastery, 2 things come to mind. One is, and this is something an uncle told me once. He said, no matter what you do in life, be the best at it. And then the second thing is, we live in a world where we have the internet, we have access to so much, a wealth of information and knowledge. These 2 aspects, if you use them well, you don't have an excuse, if that makes sense, right? If you use them well, you can really design your life, even if you come from a more disadvantaged background. So just wanted, what are your thoughts? Because now you're living in Indonesia, that world, the Stanford world, could be very far away, right? When you see, and you said earlier in the beginning, you were saying that what you noticed when you first moved here was you can see like a disparity as well.
Totally.
So what would you say to those young people, I guess, in terms of how do you become successful, or how should you want to design your life?
Yeah, it's such a big question, but I think ultimately for, at least for me and my journey, I also didn't grow up from a ton of privilege. And something that I think worked really well for me is always just trying to focus hard on like, who are you looking up to, perhaps? And I think like setting the right expectations of the role model, or maybe not even expectation, but the ceiling, right? What are you trying to achieve? I think is really helpful. And for me, for one reason or another, I ended up speaking. I had a very close relationship with some of my teachers in high school. And I feel like that really helped in terms of just kind of understanding what's even possible. What, if I wanted to do more, what could I do?
Yeah.
And so I think like finding the right people to look up to was really helpful. And the second thing for me was like, I kind of like you said, with the self-mastery, I think the implied assumption is like you have this, like every opportunity is an opportunity to grow and to learn something, right? That's kind of what is implied inside of that. And I think that's something that I really, really took to heart for whatever reason. Like everything was growth opportunity for me. And I just pushed myself like, I'm going to invest, even if it's painful, like everything I do is going to be about growth because I'm going to try to, and then I'll reap it later. You know, I'll reap the benefits later. But for now, when you're young, while I have energy, it's all about just hitting the pavement and doing as much as I can and working as hard as I can and sucking it up in some ways.
But that's interesting you say that, because then a lot of young people nowadays they live a life of instant gratification where I want to have it all today. Do you think that putting hard work, like the idea of putting hard work in, perseverance, effort, but you see your return later in life, is that a mindset a lot of young people have? I'm not sure if you interact with a lot of young people.
No, it's interesting. Actually, one of the posts that I'm writing in my notes app, not published yet, is actually all about delayed gratification.
Right.
It's about this concept because as I reflect on my life, I realized that delayed gratification had such a positive impact. And now as an adult, I'm feeling the downsides of it. And so I'm grappling with the fact that I'm never allowing myself to be happy. I'm not allowing myself to, like, for example, even like buy things that I want. Like, you know, I don't let myself do these things because I was always a delayed gratification person, and that it's not like
that's the flip side of that.
And it's not like at some point you're like, okay, like
life's good now, I'm gonna enjoy.
It doesn't happen, right? This is who you are, and it kind of, so for me, I'm like really grappling with the downsides of it. But at the same time, I'm really recognizing how powerful the delayed gratification was. And there is this interesting study done by, like a meta-analysis done by some sociologist. I don't exactly remember. It's in my notes. But he was basically saying that if you quantitatively measure the ability for young people in a society to delay their gratification, that is very directly correlated to the success of that country, to like the GDP growth of that country. And so even just economically, there's like, as a society, there's a huge benefit in being able to grit and to work hard and invest for your future instead of those, you know, instant
like I need it. If life's not giving me the benefits today, then but that is a big, because then if you look at and not to, am I making an assumption here, but if a lot of the younger population, especially with social media and you know, being tempted by so much that you can have but don't have, if they're not able to master that delayed gratification, then I mean, you're impacting your entire economic, the economic growth of your nation. Scary.
I guess that is one very heavy way of thinking about it.
Interesting.
But I think it also comes down to like an identity thing. Like, do you identify as someone who is willing to put in the effort now and delay that gratification? Or are you someone who would, you know, you have your own problems today, and there's a reason why you want to instant gratify because you are under psychological stress or whatever it might be. And do you identify as someone who succumbs to that in a way, or like you identify as that stress? So I don't know. I know. But
I also wonder how we can teach that, whether it's in schools or with your parents, right? How do you bring your kids up to, you know, to find that balance?
And I think that's probably one of the hardest things of parenting. Right? But I do think a lot of it probably comes from parenting.
Which is what it is.
Hard questions. Who knows?
Another quote from one of your articles. I think this is the one you wrote with Maudi. You said your career's 30 to 40 year journey. So think broadly about how you need to grow and what questions need to be answered in order to accomplish your goals. Don't just think linearly. But I feel like a lot of young people struggle with their because it sounds very strategic when you say this, like it's a bit of a strategic plan for your life.
I see.
But still being open to flows and such. Yeah, so I'm quite interesting to see, like, how do you encourage young people to, if someone goes, I don't even have goals, or I don't know what I want to do in life, or this, you know, sometimes having too much is also not a good thing. What would you say to someone if they came to you for like mentorship advice?
I think that person who's saying to me, where do I even start? I don't even have goals. I think the thing that I wrote is exactly for that person, because I think the way that I meant to write it, or what I was trying to convey was, you don't know which direction your life is going to go. I mean, let's say you have a specific goal and like, I want to be, a CEO of a company, whatever. You have a specific goal, but maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't. Sometimes it's a little bit out of your control. But what you can control is, if you think about your career more broadly, and you think about your career as accumulation of skills. All right. So, with the job that I'm in now, maybe it's not ideal, but I'm learning to be independent, or I'm learning to be a great problem solver, or here I'm learning to manage stakeholders better, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
If you think about your career as an accumulation of skills that will eventually take you down the path that you want to go with those skills that you've developed, I think maybe that's
so like smaller steps.
Smaller steps, and focusing really on what can you extract from what you're doing.
Right.
That's broader than just that career.
Right. Yeah.
But it's really, what are you learning and how you're growing as a person, something like that.
You're probably here because you're curious about Jesse Choi. And that's the same curiosity I had when I started Debonair, to have honest conversations about how we live, what we value, and the choices that shape us. In season 1, we spoke to inspiring Malaysians, and it became clear that these stories weren't just local. They were real, relatable, and worth sharing far beyond our borders. So now we're in Jakarta, exploring voices from around the region, starting with Indonesia. This podcast keeps on teaching through our guests. Thank you for subscribing and for being here as we learn from each other.
I like what you say about the ability to extract value from a situation you're in, or from a job that you're in. Because I feel like I speak to a lot of young people that enter the workforce, and they, after like 6 months of the job, they're like, I hate this job, I can't be here, and they want to quit. So you have this idea of like, I'm going to check out when I don't like something. So, but I agree with you. I think that yes, you can, but then I think it's more of a mindset perhaps to see the value in what you're doing. And I think it's also a bit of an outlook on life.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's also something that maybe doesn't come naturally, but you have to train yourself, and that's okay that you have to train yourself. But I think it's a worthwhile investment in that mindset.
Yeah. So a lot of VCs and tech players in, say, Southeast Asia is the place to be. And I think you said that as well, right? But they say it's, we've got a collectively huge populations, growth, consumption, and of course skills and diversity in language. You say that Southeast Asia is underrated for its hard work, talent, and diverse reality and economic opportunity. So now that you're here, what do you think about, like, what is your perception from the business ecosystem in Southeast Asia? What is your take on it?
Yeah. I mean, I think I have a lot more nuance on those points. But I think I still mostly agree with the points that I made, I guess, 4 years ago or whenever that was.
Things could have changed.
Yeah, lots changed. But I do think that that there is still a tremendous amount of like possible innovation.
Right.
I do think that, of course, just like demographically, we were talking about growing country, huge country. That's all very exciting. But I think one thing that I've been learning and I've been surprised by is when you think about, I guess, coming from like Silicon Valley, when you think about innovation, you're thinking about like, okay, what is like the most cutting edge AI thing that I'm doing, right? But that's not what innovation has to be, especially in a region like Southeast Asia or Indonesia. A lot of innovation comes from just doing the very basic things correctly. So like, for example, something like a company that got a big private equity investment recently is like a chain of dental clinics. And it's just taking your dental, your mom and pop dental clinic and just kind of taking a bunch of them, standardizing the procedures, making them a little bit better, building a proper, procedure and company out of it. And that's innovation. That's real innovation.
Yeah.
Or even you think about, a company that recently went public is a coffee company, right? And like F&B is quite, big here, and it's a lot of innovation in F&B. And it's just making coffee that's a little bit better, that's priced a little bit better, that's marketed a little bit better compared to the alternative, which is, getting your coffee at a local warung or whatever it might be. And so innovation comes from anywhere. Almost everything can be innovated on. And so like the surface area of what is addressable for innovation or for entrepreneurship feels huge. Yeah, absolutely huge. And so that's been very, I think, motivating for a lot of entrepreneurs in this region. So that's, I think, why I still stand by a lot of what I say, because there is still a tremendous amount of opportunity. It might not be in the most frontier tech,
right,
but it's everywhere, basically. That's how I see it.
So what are your thoughts on AI then? Because it's like this, everyone's like ChatGPT and for everything under the sun. But how would you advise, or how would you see your regular company being able to use it to improve productivity, efficiency, processes, or even individuals?
Yeah, the AI tools that we have now are incredibly powerful already. At our company, we use, of course, your classic ChatGPTs or whatever to come up with marketing copy, or to come up with or to discuss, is this the right idea or whatever. We have tools that we integrate with our code base, so our coders use AI to help, debug and to write more efficient code and whatever. So I think AI is already extremely powerful, and realistically probably can replace a lot of the workforce. I think the one thing that AI, maybe because AI came out so fast and it became so useful so quickly, the thing that I see personally for myself and maybe for my team too, is I think they replace like problem solving and critical thinking with AI.
Yeah.
And they just ask it like, what should I do with my life? Like huge questions that AI cannot possibly answer, because it's just the shortcut, because they think it, but realistically it cannot replace, critical thought yet, I think. So,
but then that's the fear in a way, that we're kind of, is it dumbing us down because we're kind of throwing all the slightly complex, there's stuff where we have to actually use your thinking brain thought process, and you're kind of giving that off to.
Because it's so convenient. But you are, exactly, you're actively choosing to give that power away to AI. And so I think AI will become more powerful and more irreplaceable quicker than people think, because they are actively choosing to figure out my life for me. And then of course it will, but it might not be exactly what you want or whatever, so that's the risk maybe.
So you're a co-CEO of Riku, and it's a bit of a bold play, crypto in a very young, dynamic market in this part of the world. So you tell us a little bit about that journey. Like, you joined the company and where you guys are, and are you very much national in Indonesia, or do you have regional plans?
Yeah, so right now we're national in Indonesia. I joined the company about 3 or 3.5 years ago as like a late co-founder. And since then we raised our Series A and blah, 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 blah. The reason that I joined was, number one, I have a lot of interest and I have experience in investing in the past. And I believe that enabling greater access to investing, and especially investing in good global asset classes, I think is a key part of financial freedom, and it's a key human right. And so that was kind of the mission that I was quite passionate about. But I think honestly, even bigger than that was, one, I really liked the team that I was talking to, in terms of we're extremely different, super, super different. Me and my co-founders are super different. And I wanted that experience. Like, if I'm going to move to Indonesia, totally new place, and like restart my career, I don't want to work with like another Stanford GSB guy. Like, I want to work with the local guys who do think differently, and I want to learn from them.
Yeah.
And so that was one big part. And then secondly, just kind of tactically, the business model itself is like, I was quite sensitive of moving to a country where I actually don't know what a good business model looks like, or what a good business looks like. And I was afraid of these companies that had this huge hype, huge promise.
Oh yeah.
But they were not like very solid, they didn't have solid unit economics or whatever.
Yeah.
And so this business, which is just, every time there's a transaction, we take a small cut of it. It's like a super robust and super high quality business model and so that was just kind of, specifically speaking, also a part of the reason that I was interested in joining this company. Yeah, that's how I thought.
And you brought up a point on companies that they're in the news, big and exciting on the outside, but when you actually look at the books, they're quite the opposite.
Perhaps,
in some cases. And what is that? What's with that? because I know you have, we talk about burn rate, we talk about like all your series of fundraising, and sometimes the actual business model isn't solid, like you say.
Yeah.
But there is room for businesses like that to exist,
right.
Or is it just comes from the US where you have this very high risk attitude towards like, we're going to dump a lot of money in this and see where it goes?
Yeah, I think both are exactly right. They're in general in early stage investing, or the guys who are giving the money to these startups, there is generally a very high tolerance of risk.
Yeah.
And the risk that they're taking is that even if it doesn't work today, it will work tomorrow because the market evolves, or because you get to enough scale where you are profitable now, or whatever. And that model of thinking is, realistically speaking, taken overwhelmingly from the US, where that model has worked.
Yeah.
But the market risks, the risk that you can get big enough, whatever, you've trained that model off of American company data. And when you take that to a place like Indonesia, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, And so that's kind of what I was quite sensitive to, is like, I don't know anything about this country that I'm coming into. I don't want to then take all that additional risk onto my company and like hope that this company becomes something in the future, even though it doesn't work today, because there's so many extraneous things in there.
Right.
I'd rather that I'm already moving to a big country. I'm already taking a lot of risk.
Yeah.
Let's at least control and have a business that works from day one, kind of like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so, after a few years working in Indonesia, in this region, I imagine, I ask, right? Can ASEAN, can Southeast Asia, can it be more borderless? You look at, are there other jurisdictions? Are there restrictions when it comes to doing business? Can you have companies that have a regional footprint? Is it easy or is it quite challenging? So do you have thoughts on whether Southeast Asia could be a little bit more together, a bit more unified in that sense?
Yeah,
I wonder if you guys have experienced that, right? In doing what?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have direct experience in that actually, but because we are Indonesia only. But I do feel like, in general, if you're gonna start a company and it's gonna be a big, proper company and you have big goals for it, it does need to be regional. I don't think you can target a single country within Southeast Asia. And, well, I'm not saying always, I'm just generalizing.
Yeah.
But for like a tech startup, generally speaking, I think you need to be regional. Number one. Number two, I think just like, I don't know if this is exactly what we're talking about, but like geopolitically, it would of course help if we were more united, of course. And I think like Indonesia or Malaysia or the Philippines it shouldn't stand by itself. There's no reason.
I mean, I joke about it. I say, what do we have? What do all of us countries have in common? And it's like we like to eat rice and noodles because languages are different, cultures are similar, but there are key differences.
Right.
But yeah, as someone from the region, I'm like, how do we? We still have a lot of restrictions in travel and in that movement of people. But I wonder, from a business perspective, is it very business friendly? And it's nice to see there are some tech players that have a regional footprint.
Yeah.
But I just wonder for smaller, medium startups, whether that's something is just too challenging for them or too restrictive for growth.
I think the short answer is, it is for example, if I wanted to expand to Malaysia, it is a different country with a whole different set of rules and regulations and whatever. So no matter when you're expanding to a different country, I mean,
you're going to have to encounter.
Yeah, it'll never be easy.
Yeah.
You'll always have some things that you're going to encounter. But I do think that it's probably simpler because at least in my industry, I think regulations are maybe a little bit more knowable, or maybe a little bit more.
And you're in I would say, a newer space, right? It's just, I think governments and policy is still chasing up with crypto to some degree. On
the crypto side, definitely it's still evolving.
Yeah.
And so there's probably opportunity to slot yourself in that way. Yeah.
What's the hardest thing you've ever done in life?
Hardest thing I've done in life?
Yeah.
That is a good question. That is a really good question. Hardest thing I've done in life. Wow.
Or have you tried something, or even from a business perspective, did you ever try something that didn't work out, that
So so maybe these are small. This isn't like this huge, thing, but in my career, which is hopefully still early, but in my career, every step that I've made I've failed the first time. So I mentioned to you that I failed getting into GSB or getting into Stanford the first time, but actually my first job that I got, I failed the first time because generally speaking, from school, you want to get the internship first, and then the internship converts to something. And so the vast majority of my classmates have internships at good companies, and I failed to get one. And I was like devastated. I was like, what? Especially my competitive side. I was like, what am I doing? Yeah, I was like, what am I doing wrong? But so I failed the first time on that. When I worked in my private equity job, I actually applied to several private equity jobs the year before, didn't get into any that I wanted. And then a year later, because it's kind of like a yearly cycle, tried again the next year. So at my first job, I was planning on staying for 2 years, stayed for 3. And then at my next job, my private equity job, I was planning to stay 2 years, applied to GSB, didn't get in, got in the second time again. So I feel like in terms of my career, every big career move that I've made
is on your second
always
try.
Tried the second time.
Oh, how interesting.
So I think to myself a lot when I think about like this startup.
Yeah.
I was like, is this like my first try? And
is there going to be a second try coming?
How do I jump past that hurdle and just kind of, but yeah, that's not necessarily the hardest thing that I've done in life. But anyway, there's kind of a common pattern for me of always failing the first time, which is, it's interesting. I mean, blessing and curse maybe.
So you say that, clearly a competitive personality, right? So now in this stage in your life, the work you're doing now, the life you're building in Jakarta, do you think, is there a sense of wisdom or maturity or shift when you assess like what is success for you? Or that competitive spirit? Yeah.
I'm trying really hard to be less competitive, actually, because I do think that there are real downsides of it.
Because being less competitive doesn't mean less ambitious.
Right.
Right.
It's true. But you do have to be more specific in your ambition, right?
Yes.
Because when you're in school and everyone's playing the same exact game and it's just like, okay, for example, like who has the best internship, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
Everyone's on that path of, in life, your job is to get an internship right now. And so it becomes, when you're just generally ambitious, that general ambitious is focused on the thing that everyone's doing anyway.
Yeah.
Now, like you're saying, when you're out in the real world, you cannot be just ambitious about everything or competitive about everything.
You got to pick your battles.
You have to pick. And so what I'm trying to do is just, what is the ambition that I really want to focus on?
Yeah.
And then how do I only be competitive or just self-judging only in that element that really matters and forget all the other stuff, because I'm never going to be able to compete on every small mounting of every pub.
Mm-hmm. So how's that working out?
I think the writing helps, the reflection helps. But honestly, I do think like getting married was a big step in that direction for me. Because I think it allowed me to kind of understand more clearly what do I really think is important in life.
Right.
And my wife's personality is quite complementary to mine, where she really helps me understand, look, you're being way too hard on yourself, or you're not letting yourself be happy in this way, or whatever. And it's allowed me to kind of hone down, okay, then these are the things I really want to focus on really optimizing and being happy around, like spending time with her, or being a thoughtful like person. I think that's something that I care a lot about, or being kind, maybe not polite like we talked about, but being kind. Or these are things that I have very clear ambitions about. I'm starting to let go of ambitions like I want to be the richest, person ever, or I want to,
No, but I love that, because even when I was asking you that question, my mind automatically goes to, my own bias. It went to like material or outwardly successes, right? A job, a career. But like you can be ambitious with certain characteristics or soft skills, right?
I guess. At least that's the goal, right? Yeah. I mean, how successful I'll be in doing that, we'll see, because everyone has, of course, their extrinsic things that maybe they shouldn't care about, but they do.
Yeah.
And that's just part of growing up.
So what does life look like for the next few years for Jesse in Jakarta?
I think hopefully continuing to adapt, continuing to grow more fondly of this place. I think I will, whether it's, I always want to be doing something entrepreneurial, I think. Whether that's, continuing on this company or doing something in this space, or whether it's a separate thing. And for example, I want to support, refugees like you do, and whatever it might be. I think I want to be entrepreneurial and create value in that way. But I think for now we're really happy living in Jakarta and living the life that we live.
And what would you share with people at the starting off their journey, their career? If you were to give them like a couple of, things to think about or to hold on to in that journey, what would those be?
Yeah, I think the first one maybe is what we talked about. Like everything that you do, there's an opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of framing your mind to be able to see that growth. But if you're doing some job that you think is really boring or whatever, you can think about it as, okay, how do I'm going to learn how to add value in this role that feels very flat and boring and useless. I'm going to make myself useful. For example, that might be something that you think about learning. So that's one, I think everything in life, every minute of life, there's something that you can take from it.
Yeah.
Number two, I think, especially for someone starting a career, I think the most important thing, just tactically speaking, is how do you become useful? Like how do you add as much value in the organization, to your boss, to your team, whatever it might be.
So it doesn't matter if they don't get the first internship or the second like you or the third. They shouldn't quit life.
Definitely not. And I mean, if everyone is successful all the time, you would never learn, right? If you play tennis and you win every single match, you're probably not playing the right people, realistically speaking. Like you need failures to continue to grow. And why would you deprive yourself of the opportunity to fail? Because that is the opportunity to grow. Something like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for chatting with me. It's been really nice to have you on the show.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me. Yeah.